I'll call this meeting to order, the regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation Public Works Committee this day, June 6, 2017. I'm Councilmember Reich. I chair the committee, joined by my colleagues, Councilmembers Yang, Glidden, and Bender. We are a quorum and may proceed with today's business. Today's agenda, we have 13 items, 3 of which are public hearings. I'll go through the consent items. Any committee member can pull an item for further consideration if they wish. Item 4 on the consent is the temporary easement agreement with the University of Minnesota for the repair of the 10th Avenue Storm Tunnel. Item 5 is the agreement with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for landscaping improvements in the Tangletown neighborhood. Item 6 is agreement with Copart for offsite auction services. Item 7 is the contract amendment with ACOM for the 26th Avenue North Street reconstruction project. Item 8 is the contract amendment with Thomas & Sons Construction for the 7th Street North reconstruction project. Item 9 is the agreement with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for Samotar Crossing project. Pretty exciting. Item 10 is the professional services contract with Parsons Spinkerhoff Incorporated for 3rd Street crossover project. Item 11 is the grant from Hennepin County for the 27th Avenue Northeast Protected Bikeway project. A series of actions to move forward, and I believe the neighborhood group is doing the match, which is really cool to see. Item 12 is the 26th Avenue North Street reconstruction project, and its assessment reduction for 66 26th Avenue North. And the final item on consent is the sale of public land at 501 11th Avenue South. And there's also a setting a public hearing for that action, July 11th, 2017. All right, council members wish to pull any item? Seeing none, I will move all items as presented. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. Those items get forward to full council, and we can now go to the top of the agenda. Good morning, Director Hutchinson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Our first public hearing today is our 2017 alley renovation program, and information will be presented by Mike Kennedy, the Director of Transportation Maintenance and Repair.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Mike Kennedy, Transportation Maintenance and Repair from Public Works. We're here there this morning for the public hearing for our 2017 alley renovation program. On April 28th, 2017, the council designated the alley locations for improvements to be made. These improvements consist of installing a bituminous or an asphalt overlay on concrete alleys. The work is being done to extend the operational life of the alleys and to facilitate localized drainage. This year we have 10 alleys located throughout the city as shown on the map. I don't know if you can see anything on the map. They're little tiny dots, but you can see them scattered around the city in many different wards. The 2017 adopted uniform assessment rate will be used for the portion of the project cost being assessed conforming to the current city policy of using a uniform rate for street construction. The 2017 rate is 7 cents per square foot of land area abutting the alley to be improved. The rate's the same for residential and non-residential properties. The total amount to be assessed is $91,405.02. The list of the 10 alleys is in your letter, again, scattered around the city. So today our recommendation is passage of a resolution ordering the work to proceed and adopting special assessments in the amount of $91,405.02 for this program, and passage of a resolution requesting the Board of Estimate and Taxation to issue for the issuance of assessment bonds in the amount as described. So that's my presentation. If there are any questions, we can take them.
Any questions per the staff presentation? Seeing none, I will then open the public hearing. People can come forward, state their name and address for the record. I do have one person signed in, so we'll start there. So Andrew Hersey, please come forward.
Hi. This would be regarding the portion of the alley, Taylor Street Northeast to Fillmore Street Northeast, between 20th Avenue Northeast and 22nd Avenue Northeast. About a month ago, they already did repaving on the alley. I'm not sure what they're proposing at this point, but it seems like the portion of the alley that needs to be repaired has already been repaired. I don't know if there's more information on that available, but at this point, it seems like any more work is either unnecessary or premature. Also, specifically to my property on 22nd Avenue. All of my access is off of 22nd Avenue, so the alley doesn't provide any direct benefit to me. Both my garage access and waste collection is off of 22nd Avenue and not off of the alley. So the alley really provides no benefit to me as a homeowner. The alley could be non-existent or completely impassable, and it would make basically no difference to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else wish to come forward, make comment? Anyone else wish to come forward? Is there any record of previous work done on this alley, perhaps?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I suspect perhaps it was patched
Mhm.
this spring. I don't know the details of it. I am not exactly familiar with the alley, but it is very possible our crews are out to patch it up to, get it ready. This will be a full resurfacing of the entire surface of the alley. So it's a much more aggressive kind of work than was probably done out there. I can look into see what was done. Regarding the no direct access, we do hear that fairly often. It is the city's policy to assess all abutting property owners, access or not. This is part of the infrastructure. This is how we fund the infrastructure. You could almost make an argument that there are a lot of houses that don't have their access to the streets. They access off the alleys, but they still pay street assessments. So again, just in a nutshell, it is our practice to assess all abutting property owners.
So with our uniform, the benefits test is on a systems basis.
It's on a system basis.
And then in terms of alley conditions, it also functions as water management.
Absolutely. It's part of our stormwater conveyance system. And so to have it properly paved is part of that critical infrastructure.
All right. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I will move forward per staff recommendation on item 1. Any further conversation? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, we can go to item number 2.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, our second public hearing today is the 46th Avenue Street Reconstruction Project, the project approval and assessment. We have additional information that will be presented by Elisha Langat with Transportation Maintenance and Repair.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Elisha Langat, an engineer with Transportation Maintenance and Repair, Division of Public Works. Today I'm here presenting for the public hearing of 46 Avenue South Reconstruction Project number 2290, located between 46th Street and Godfrey Parkway. The proposed project will consist of full removal of the existing pavement, new sidewalks, bike lanes, new pavement, new curb and gutter, and utility improvements. The project will also include planted boulevards with trees, street lighting, new signage, and new pavement markings. The total project cost is $616,300, and the total assessment amount is $2,953.05, based on the 2017 residential reconstruction assessment rate of 87 cents a square foot. Construction is scheduled to start August 14 and end September 22nd in order to accommodate scheduled events on the parkway. Today, Public Works is asking City Council to pass resolutions ordering the work to proceed, adopting special assessments, and authorizing sale of assessment bonds. This concludes my presentation. I'll stand by for questions.
Thank you. Any questions per the presentation by staff? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. It's a public hearing for item number 2. Anyone wish to come forward? Anyone wish to come forward? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and move approval of item number 2 as presented by staff. Any further conversation? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. That item carries. We can now go to our last public hearing, item 3.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, item 3 is actually quite a large body of work for the Department of Public Works, and it is an annual report of the stormwater management program. Because this is such a vital part of our work in public works, Elizabeth Stout has a presentation that she will work through with you to present what is contained within the program, and then also to support the public comment that may come along today.
Thank you,
Well,
and good morning.
thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Liz Stout with Surface Water and Sewers, and again, I'm here today to talk to you about the city's stormwater management program. The city and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board are co-permittees on the city's stormwater permit. One of the requirements of that permit is for public input into our stormwater management plan. Each year before we submit our annual report to the Pollution Control Agency, we come before you to talk about different aspects of that program. First, a little bit of history. The national focus on cleaning up our waterways began with the passage of the Federal Clean Water Act in 1972. At that time, the primary focus was controlling industrial pollution. These two pictures here indicate why that was a problem. The picture on the top is of a 1969 fire on the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, and the picture at the bottom shows that same river as it enters Lake Erie. I really like to show pictures like this because this was less than 50 years ago, and it really shows the progress that we've made to date on improving our water quality. You know, while we still have a ways to go, I think that the task back then looked even more insurmountable. While it started with regulating industrial discharges and wastewater treatment, as time passed, the Clean Water Act evolved, and it began to include municipal operations as well as large construction sites. Under the Federal Clean Water Act, Minneapolis, like many other major cities, needs to manage its stormwater in order to keep pollutants from degrading our water bodies. This management is done under the municipal stormwater permit. All of these regulations really drive us to two main goals. We want water bodies that are fishable and swimmable. We have healthy ecosystems, and we have water bodies that we can recreate in. Some of the biggest pollutants that we deal with at the city level are going to be suspended sediments, and that's with all of the pollutants that attach themselves to that soil. That includes phosphorus, heavy metals, and PAHs. We also have bacteria and chlorides in the form of salt. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss these three major pollutants and what the city, with both our internal and external partners, are really doing to understand them and minimize their impacts. This picture is of where the Minnesota River meets the Mississippi River by Fort Snelling. The Minnesota River is the one on top that's really heavily full of sediment. This is most of the Minnesota River watershed is heavily agricultural, with a lot of drain tile, a lot of heavy flows, and they have a lot of degraded natural systems. The riverbanks themselves erode and then enter the Minnesota River and ultimately the Mississippi. Here's a picture downstream. This actually shows the St. Croix River, where it enters the Mississippi. Again, we have a lot of sedimentation problems within the Mississippi watershed and the Minnesota River watershed. This flows into Lake Pepin, and they're saying right now that with the level of sedimentation happening in Lake Pepin, it could be completely silted in within 300 years. That sounds like a long time, but when we're looking at geological scales, it's a pretty minor amount of time for a lake that size to fill in. An example of a project that the city of Minneapolis has worked on to minimize the amount of sediment in the stream is this restoration of Bassett Creek through Theodore Wirth Park. While this wasn't in the city of Minneapolis, it was done with our partner, the Park and Recreation Board. The purpose of this project was to improve water quality, to improve the amount of sediment going into the stream, as well as to protect all of the public infrastructure and improve the wildlife habitat through this section of Bassett Creek. We're coming up on the next phase of this project of Bassett Creek. It involves some downstream stretches of the creek in Minneapolis. We're looking at some sections adjacent to the Fruant Mill site, just south of Glenwood, as well as the creek from Cedar Lake Road to the entrances of the new and old Bassett Creek tunnels. Those are around the Van White Bridge area. This is kind of pictures of where we're going to be doing our next phase. Construction is actually anticipated to start during the winter of 2017-2018. Outside of stabilizing a lot of our natural systems, our creeks and rivers, one of the most effective best management practices for reducing the amount of sediment and phosphorus in stormwater is a traditional stormwater pond. Stormwater ponds work by allowing sediment to settle out, and then every about 15 to 25 years, that sediment with the accumulated pollutants are dredged out. This picture right here is of a Shingle Creek Park Pond, and this is actually was dredged this past winter, and we're working on the vegetation reestablishment as we speak. Stormwater ponds also have other benefits besides reducing pollutants in stormwater. Many of the city's stormwater ponds we use to plant native plantings. This provides a lot of pollinator habitat, as well as it offers an education opportunity to neighbors. It teaches them about native plantings, about pollinators, as well as about water quality. The city also implements best management practices during construction of our own projects. This spring, Surface Water and Sewers and the University of Minnesota partnered with the Water Division in order to create a brand new training for all of their field staff. We actually had about 70 people from the water department that were doing a construction site management training to look at all of the best management practices while they're in the middle of construction, to try and keep all of that construction runoff and construction debris out of our waterways. The bacteria. Bacteria is another significant pollutant that negatively impacts the city's water quality. As in other older cities, Minneapolis's sewers were originally combined. All of the sanitary sewer and storm sewer took all of the water and put it right into the Mississippi River. One key action the city has taken is the separation of the city's combined sewer systems. It's an expensive process that's taken many decades. It actually started originally in the 1930s. Since the 1930s, Minneapolis has steadily carried out a system of programs to separate out and reduce what's called a combined sewer overflow, or a CSO. A CSO would likely occur when a heavy rainstorm caused sewage to enter the Mississippi River through an outfall point. This graph here illustrates the progress that the city has made in eliminating those CSOs. The blue line at the top indicates annual precipitation since 1984, and the green line at the bottom represents the annual volume of sewer overflows. As you can see, the city has dramatically reduced the number of CSOs and has kept significant amount of harmful bacteria out of the river. The city currently has two separate permits, one for our combined sewer system, of which there is still some combination, and one for our municipal stormwater. We're working with the MPCA to combine those two permits to really understand the integration between all of our water resources. The city's really effectively eliminated one major source of bacteria from our waterways by eliminating CSOs. However, there are still bacteria impairments within the city. One of those is Minnehaha Creek. In 2016, the city began a bacteria study to try and determine the source of bacteria impairments to the creek. It actually did genetic typing to see if it was human, pet, avian, what the source was. We also looked at if it's from original sources or if there's bacteria regrowth. We're only through the first phase of our study. We're going to have one more year of looking at that bacteria. But what we found is we don't have none of this bacteria is from a human source. What that's really showing us is we have no real infrastructure degradation that would cause an interaction between our sewers and our water resources. Phase 2 coming up this year will really look at regrowth and whether the soil bacteria impacts the bacteria in our waterways. So more to come on that. Looking at ways to remove bacteria once it's in the system. The Shingle Creek Watershed Management Commission, along with the Park Board and the city, we recently obtained a federal grant to look at a field trial of a new project. Technical assistance is being provided by the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory with the University of Minnesota. They have something called Minnesota Filter. It's an iron-enhanced sand filter that's used to remove dissolved phosphorus from ponds, from water. We're looking at an application of using biochar, which is a wood product. It's kind of like a charcoal that's been shown in laboratory settings to reduce bacteria, but it's never really been looked at in a field setting. So what they're doing at this pond at Humboldt and 49th is they're doing retrofitting the pond with a sand filter bench, adding in those iron filings as well as biochar, and they're going to be doing inflow, outflow, and then just general water quality monitoring in this pond to see if those laboratory results can then be translated into actual real world results. The Shingle Creek WMO is going to be doing 3 years of monitoring on this. And so we should have some results soon to see if this is a type of best management practice we could possibly retrofit our existing stormwater ponds to reduce bacteria. And the last pollutant we're going to be talking about today is chlorides. The primary source of chlorides in urban areas is salt applied in the winter months to roads, parking lots, and sidewalks. This chart here shows the increase in U.S. salt sales over time from the 1940s through 2000. As you can see, it's significantly gone up, not just due to increased salt being used, but just the increase in volume of roads that exist within the country. Salt is an important component of our winter safety. However, when snow and ice melt, all of that salt goes right into the water and into our waterways. Salt is one of those pollutants that it can't be removed, short of reverse osmosis. Once it's in the water, it's in our groundwater, it's in our surface water. And they say, the PCA is saying that approximately 78% stays within our area. It doesn't get flushed down into the Mississippi and down to the Gulf of Mexico. The city is working on this problem. There's a snow and ice manual that's been drafted that provides guidance on the responsible best management practices that can help minimize the need for salt. One problem with salt is it says that the EPA predicts that for every $50 of salt used, there's another $750 worth of damage that occurs, both to infrastructure as well as cars through corrosion. So minimizing salt isn't just good for the environment, it's also good for everyone's pocketbook. Our local watersheds provide a great deal of training for municipal staff. In 2016, 5 staff attended specific salt management training, where some of the topics such as application rates, how to calibrate equipment, de-icing and anti-icing techniques were all discussed and were taught to different city staffers. Public expectation is one of the major drivers in salt application rates in the winter. People expect to be able to drive during the middle of a snowstorm and not have any ice on the streets. So one way that the city is working with the MWMO, Freshwater Society and neighborhood associations, is really trying to teach what the level of expectation should be, is that maybe we need to be more careful when we're out driving in winter and not expect dry roads immediately. And we're trying to educate residents on how to minimize the use of salt by using proper salt application techniques. Right. Well, I'd like to say thank you for your time. And I'd also like to thank our many partners, including the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, our internal partners, as well as our 4 watershed districts. And I'll open it up for any questions.
Any questions for staff? Councilmember Gordon.
Well, I have a couple of questions, and I really appreciate the report and all the work that's gone into this. I have one question that has to do, it was related to looking at Bassett Creek, and it seems like we've been taking some efforts to daylight that creek a little bit more and to open it up. And I think people often think of the benefits of daylighting a creek like that as for aesthetic purposes, and it looks better, but also I think we can make the case that it helps clean up the water because the water gets more filtration and has an opportunity to get cleaned up as it's moving forward. Would you say that's true? And I'm also curious if we're looking at any other opportunities of daylighting creeks or perhaps marshes that have been covered over during the development of the city and buried.
Okay. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, I guess I can't speak to recent efforts to look at daylighting the creek. I know that Bassett Creek, there's definitely been a lot of study through the Bassett Creek Valley of looking at that area. I might bring up Lois Eberhardt to talk about some of the history of what's been done. I know that the city, we do implement what's called the Wetland Conservation Act, WACA, that looks at preserving the existing wetlands that we do have and making sure that both their function as well as their value are preserved within the city. Do you want to speak to Bassett Creek?
Yes, I'd like to add a few comments. I'm Lois Eberhard, also from the Surface Water and Sewers Division of Public Works, and I have more time in with the department, so I have some history. And I might ramble on more than what you were looking for. But so as to Bassett Creek specifically, when Heritage Park was being designed, we thought that the creek might be daylighted through there, but it would have involved taking the Summit Academy, and instead the system that was built sort of has the memory of the old creek, but it's not a literal daylighting of the creek. Every decade or so, a developer thinks about daylighting the creek near the mouth under the North Loop area and hires people to envision. And so the creek downtown Minneapolis now does have runoff, but it's the local runoff. It's not the water that comes from the 9 communities upstream, because that is in the new Bassett Creek Tunnel under the main part of downtown. But under the North Loop, there is some local drainage, and there's not a feasible amount of consistent flow. And appearance-wise, I've seen renderings of what some people have proposed, but there's been no sincere effort at looking for funding to do that. Some developers wish that it wasn't under their parking lots, that we'd relocate it into the streets and that kind of thing. So there is concern. But, and then Hennepin County did a study a few years ago. I don't recall if it's before your tenure, Councilmember Gordon. And they looked at especially the Bridal Veil Creek. But there's a lot of contamination in that pipe coming from a Superfund site in St. Paul, and the safety factor, and then as well as just the land use, the density of land use at the University of Minnesota. For spatial reasons, it was not thought to be very feasible either. So our 2 creeks that are in pipes are the Bridal Veil. There's also a little bit of Ryan Creek up in the northwest part of the city near Ryan Lake. That part of it's daylighted through a commercial property or an industrial property, but most of it's in a pipe. But there haven't been any active proposals for quite some time. As far as wetlands, there is the Wetland Conservation Act, and that often comes into play for road building or major projects that are displacing existing wetlands or historic areas. And so some of the LRT projects have to spend some time and money on wetland replacement, but often they can do it in other communities where it's cheaper and where the land is available. So for example, the Blue Line Extension, also known as the Bottineau Rail, they're doing some wetland replacement up at the Target campus in Brooklyn Park. So, and that includes replacement of some areas with old wetland characteristics at the edge of Minneapolis and in Theodore Wirth Park. So those are my comments to respond to your questions.
I really appreciate that, and I hadn't thought about the Ryan Creek. I think that, and I guess the other part of my question was just assuming that having the creeks above ground and not in a pipe, where there can be grass and plants near it, also helps filter that runoff. So that would have an environmental impact on the sediment that's and gets to the river eventually.
And sunlight also, the UV portion of sunlight also does deal with bacteria, for example. So that's arguably true that having a creek daylighted would be cleaner effluent going through it. But some cities have done some very major projects. Denver, for example, with Cherry Creek. So it's interesting, but awfully expensive.
And I still think there's an opportunity for Bridal Veil, which is up in the semi area, or now we call it Prospect
Correct.
North or Tower Side, and there's lots of development coming. I think the rail yards actually got built over swamps. So there's a demand and a need for us to do water management. It might be something we end up with more like Heritage Park, where we replicate the memory of the creek that once was, and we don't actually try to restore it. I think it goes right under 27th for a while, so
Yeah.
it gets.
And
very
of course, as you know, the University of Minnesota has been buying up a lot of the property there. That would make sense for that kind of green space.
Yeah.
And so whether they plan to do any environmental projects, I don't know of any. But where we did build a stormwater pond there at the end of 25th, and the area surrounding that is now University of Minnesota.
Yeah, and I think people see those water features as a enhancement to the surrounding properties, and property values go up, and being near a creek or a stream or even a wetland is a great,
Definitely.
great for a lot of folks. Then I had a second area of questions that had to do with salt on the roads. I heard that Minnetonka's got some fantastic practices. There's also been this debate over what's the right sand and salt mix. And I think a lot of cities are moving away from using so much sand because it's so hard to clean things up. But actually, I thought salt was worse when what gets in the water because of all the chloride. So would you say that we're behind some of our neighboring cities like Minnetonka? Are we trying to catch up? Do we have goals in terms of reduction, or is there any hope of not using salt at all? I guess I want us as policymakers to be doing our job to be kind of pushing on that a little bit. I think the choices between, salt clears away the ice so well, everybody wants to have somewhere where they don't slip and they don't fall. But at the same time, we hear a lot from the environmentalists, please don't put so much salt on your sidewalks, you don't need all that. And I'm worried sometimes that it's just too easy for us to open up the salt full blast so that we can get safer streets, because that's of course a priority, but we're not looking at it in terms of the long term. So any thoughts on all that?
Councilmember Gordon, I don't think that we're behind on using our salt management techniques. I know that Minneapolis definitely has some different struggles than some of the surrounding suburban communities. And salt is one of those it's a tough pollutant. We need it for our health and safety. However, it does cause problems once it gets into our waterways. But I am going to invite Mike Kennedy up. He can probably speak a little bit more to what we're actually doing. You mentioned Minnetonka. I came from Minnetonka. I worked there for nearly 10 years. I know that we did get away from using sand, went to a pure salt, but we also don't have the issues with parking. There's no on-street parking within the city of Minnetonka, so there's not a lot of the parking removal issues.
I dare us to try that here.
So I think that the challenges in the city of Minneapolis are very different than what you see in a very suburban community like that.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, I know we said the word parking and now we get all this reactions.
Sorry.
I'm going to bring it, it's okay. I would like to offer some additional staff to help respond to this. And I think Mike Kennedy is our expert here. And I also would like to share a very short anecdote from this past winter. I have numerous colleagues in Portland, Oregon, and as you know, Portland, Oregon had a very difficult winter with a lot of snow. They have a no salt policy, and they needed to do something different, something special for the winter they had. And they reached out to us, Minneapolis, as the leader in how we use salt. And I was able to connect our colleagues in Portland, Oregon with Katrina and Mike, and we shared with them this study and plan that we're working on to even further refine how we use salt products on our roadways. So it is certainly imperfect, we know that, but it was a nice moment to hear that our colleagues in other cities see us as leaders in how we're applying salt.
And I'll add to that, one of the reasons we can keep a leadership position and are pushing our own envelope is because we do sit down with the advocates and the environmentalists and the small business associations to brainstorm and think through what we need to do to further reduce our usage. One of the key things that we've discovered in our conversations is that there's a legal component. There's a sense of requirement in terms of how the business associations, particularly the special service districts, apply through their contractors the ice mitigation. More salt means more safety, and no one wants that liability. We want to change that dialogue. We want to change that law. We want to change that sensibility. So I think that's one of our key items for the next couple winters. But there's more to it. Mr. Kennedy, of course, can explain.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Director Hutchison. Mr. Chair, um, you can't, you can, but I would rather people try not to compare us to the suburbs for the same reason that you can't compare how and when we declare snow emergencies and how snow emergencies work between us and the suburbs. As Elizabeth said, they have no parking problems. To us, a snow emergency is about solving a parking problem, moving the cars out of the way in an orderly fashion. Many of the suburbs, yes, have gone to no sand policies because they can. Um, their snow emergency rules say everybody get off the street at the same time, and they can treat everything at the same time. And so they can minimize and change their salt use. They can go to a no sand policy because they don't have to provide traction. They can plow right down to bare pavement everywhere. Because of the way we have to prioritize our streets according to the plan and according to our priorities of the high volume streets first and then the residential streets second, we don't get there for a while. So after 24 hours of cars driving on the side streets, on the residential streets, they're down to the best we can do is plow to a snowpack condition and provide some sort of abrasive for traction. And that's what we still do. We still need to do that. Both urban core cities. St. Paul has moved away a little bit more to using less sand, but we're still using sand because that's what the environment we're working in. We have taken many steps. All of our people take the same salt application classes that are available through the MPCA. We bring in the local road research board every other year to do training on calibration and salt use and looking at our application rates every year so that people are trained to put down the right amount at the right time. There are some general guidelines that you can use, but sometimes you just have to react. But we were involved with the Shingle Creek watershed TMDL study and took steps to look at best management practices for eliminating salt use during that study and still carry on those practices today. I'm on the winter maintenance subcommittee for APWA and work with professionals across the country to look at best management practices for salt application and other things. But we have to be very careful that we compare apples and apples when we're looking at different agencies, different environments, and things like that. There are a lot of practices, best management practices out there for using liquids and other sorts of things that you hear. They work much better at the southern side of the snow belt. You don't see hardly any of that in Canada, where it's really cold. We're in the middle, and so we are trying with different things. We have tried some different products. We have our own brine making equipment. We can apply brine, and we do try to anti-ice and do pre-treatment when it's appropriate. Sometimes it's not appropriate. If it's raining, you don't put brine down because it's going to wash it away. And so there's a science and an art to applying that. As we're trying to use technology as we replace our spreader equipment, we're replacing it with ground speed controls and pre-wetting equipment, because if you get the salt wet, it'll work more effectively, it'll work faster. So we're trying to watch the industry take all the appropriate steps. It's a very careful balance. It's a three-way balance between public safety, and the people demand public safety, costs, because you can buy alternative chemicals, but they're extremely expensive, and the environment. And it's that three-way battle that we're constantly watching and constantly trying to work with. So the short answer is yes, we are very well aware of best management practices in the industry, apply them here in Minneapolis when and where we can, when it's appropriate. And I think we've done, in the 20 years I've been doing this, we've seen our salt use go down significantly, but we still have to use some. So.
Councilmember Gordon?
I appreciate that. It might be interesting to someday see what the uses of sand and salt have, because they've gone down, and I think I remember reading something about that not too long ago too, that
Sure.
the use has gone down. Of course, we'll have different winters and different freeze thaws, so
Yep.
it can't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing, but if we're buying less continually, that I guess is moving in a good direction. I'm not sure what brine is. So brine is not a type of salt?
Councilmember, or Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, brine is salt water.
Okay.
That's all it is. The idea is if you dissolve just the right proportion of salt into water, you can create a mixture that won't freeze when you want to use it. And you can do two things with it. One, you can apply it to the salt when you're using the salt as a de-icer. And by having the liquid on there, it enhances the reaction, it makes it work quicker, it keeps it in place. The second thing is to put brine out and pre-treat the roads with the liquid brine. So we've got some trucks equipped with spray bars, and they go out and they will just put down a liquid application of the salt. Sometimes you'll drive around and you see what looks like white pencil lines on the pavement. That's salt brine being applied to the pavement, and you do it in those lines like that. But the idea is to have the salt there so when the precipitation starts to come, there's something there that will break the bond, and so that you can mechanically remove the snow quicker. That's all it is. It's salt water, it's pickle juice, and there are places that use pickle juice. There are some, Wisconsin, they use cheese brine because they got a lot of cheese brine, but that's all it really is salt water.
All right. Well, I've certainly learned a lot. Thanks for indulging my questions.
No, very good inquiries. Any further comments or questions? Oh, yeah. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know this has gone on for a while, but I just had a couple quick things. One was, well, now I want to know what policymakers argue about in a city that has no on-street parking. So that's my main question. I wanted to note that in my ward, I also get a lot of comments either way about sidewalk salt and snow and ice. So of course I have a ward that has a lot of, transit dependent population, a lot of folks who are walking on the sidewalks all winter. So I get a lot of questions and concerns about, are we doing enough to enforce sidewalk clearance? But then on the flip side, I also represent a part of town that has the lakes. And so I get a lot of feedback from constituents about concern about seeing so much salt. So just wanted to note that. And I would love to follow up with staff about ideas about how we could expand on some of the education efforts that you talked about, maybe even with my neighborhood organizations in the ward, to help get out the word to more folks, and particularly, again, in a part of town that has a lot of larger property owners. So we have a lot of apartment buildings. And so I think one of the things that happens is some of the property owners are kind of like, they're hiring folks to come out and to clear the sidewalks and put out salt. So there might be some efficiency in reaching out to some of the bigger property owners in the ward and see if we can experiment with ways that they could use more sensitive or less salt related methods. So that's just a note. The other thing I just wanted to also just kind of highlight that I know a lot of this work is also being wrapped into the comprehensive plan update and the modeling that's happening. And, we also get a lot of questions and comments on individual reconstruction projects about the opportunity or not to improve stormwater management within roadway projects. And so far, we've been answering those questions kind of project by project. And my understanding is that we're kind of moving in the direction of having more of a system plan about how and when that might make the most sense, and how, which things, and what the cost implications might be and the maintenance implications and all that. So I just wanted to note that and just thank staff for doing that work. And I think having a systems approach to the on-street portion of our stormwater management will help us answer those questions, again, that we often get on these reconstruction projects. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you. As a matter of fact, there's modeling that's ongoing right now to effectively do a systems approach, and that's very important work. And I don't know what the status is, how many sectors we've accomplished, but perhaps to Councilmember Bender's point, that could be a good something to note for this presentation.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if that was a question looking for an answer or not, but I'll give a quick one here. Thank you for recognizing and making everybody realize and think about the fact that a huge proportion of the loading to our waterways comes not from on the roads. It comes from parking lots, from sidewalks, it comes from other things. And only so much we can do about that. But one of the things that we do, and we're not in charge of sidewalks, so what people do with their own sidewalks is up to them, and that's about communication outreach, and perhaps some of our surface water folks can talk about that. One of the things that Chair Reich had mentioned is that we do require our contractors in the special service districts to take training on parking lot and sidewalk maintenance and salt application, things like that. So they are at least aware of and hopefully complying with, and most of them are very willing to comply with those rules. And so, we're totally willing to do our part of this, but it's a larger picture. So.
I I think at this point, we're happy to follow up further with you on the kind of the more water resources aspect of that. I know education is one of the key things that we work on, and that's one of the things that we work with our partners, the park board as well as the watershed districts on.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, great work. It's very nice to see a lot of complicated activity boiled down into a very concise presentation. So even that itself was an accomplishment. So I thank you for that, and it's a very important topic. So with that, any further commentary, Director Hutchinson?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your interest in this topic. If you would like to discuss further, have more questions and ideas, please reach out to either myself or Katrina Kessler, and we'll sort of quarterback the questions, and we'd be happy to sit down and discuss with you further.
Thank you. So
Thank
with
you.
that, we will approve item 3 as presented, and that's receiving the public comments per the presentation, and it passes a resolution adopting the Minneapolis Stormwater Management Program.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this item was also a notice to public hearing.
Oh, not just a presentation. So I will now open the public hearing. Anyone wish to come forward to make comment? Anyone wish to come forward? Seeing none, I will move item 3 with section 1 and 2 as I just described prematurely. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries, and we are now adjourned, as this was the last item on our agenda. Thank you.